Some cleaner air for you and your family could be coming. The push to cut or capture 90% of pollution from one sector within 10 years. Plus, a new era of power is blowing in. The Biden administration's planned for wind farms across America. And expanding our grid, the new technology that hopes to double its capacity to keep the lights on as we transition more and more towards clean energy. Hello and welcome to EarthX News, where we focus on sustainability, conservation, and the environment. I'm Christina Thompson. Let's get into some of the biggest headlines facing our planet. Making strides towards cutting pollution. President Biden announced his most significant new rules for power plants. The Environmental Protection Agency's new rules push coal and natural gas power plants to either cut or capture 90% of their climate pollution over the next 8 years. The hope is the rules will help to reduce carbon dioxide emissions from this sector by 75% to their peak in 2005. The EPA also announced tougher rules for mercury and smokestacks of power plants and safer disposal of toxic wastewater and coal ash, which are byproducts of electricity production. So we should be breathing cleaner air within 20 years, as these new rules for power plants will prevent nearly 1.4 billion metric tons of planet-warming pollution from entering the atmosphere through the year 2047. However, there are some critics, one CEO in the industry saying these rules are, quote, unlawful, unrealistic, and unachievable, and West Virginia's Attorney General vowed to challenge the new rules in court. President Joe Biden is also taking a look at the lithium mining in the U.S., specifically in Nevada, where conservationists are worried about threats to endangered wildflowers. The Bureau of Land Management released more than 2,000 pages of a document in a draft environmental impact statement for the Rhyolite Ridge mine. Lithium is a metal needed to create batteries for electric vehicles, a centerpiece of President Joe Biden's green energy agenda. Supporters of the lithium boron mine project say it represents another step by the administration to support the responsible domestic development of critical minerals to power the clean energy economy. But some environmentalists say the mine is just another example of the government prioritizing climate goals over wildlife protection. Nevada is home to the only existing lithium mine in the U.S., and this other one is and will soon house the second, which is currently under construction about 200 miles north of Reno. By 2030, worldwide demand for lithium is projected to have grown 6 times compared to 2020. The current administration is pushing ahead with wind energy, announcing plans for up to a dozen lease sales anticipated beginning this year and continuing through 2028. 3 of the anticipated sales would be for Gulf of Mexico tracts to be offered this year in 2025 and in 2027. Central Atlantic area leases would be sold in 2024 and 2026. Other anticipated sale areas include the Gulf of Maine, Oregon waters, an area of the Atlantic known as New York Bight, as well as California and Hawaii. Now, the sales will be coordinated by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. Since the start of President Joe Biden's administration, the Interior Department has approved the nation's first 8 large offshore wind projects and held 4 offshore wind auctions, including the first ever sales in the Pacific and Gulf of Mexico. In other offshore wind power news, plans for 3 projects are unraveling in New York, a major blow to the state's climate agenda and to the administration's energy aspirations. New York energy authorities announced they have denied contracts to 3 major projects after GE Vernova, a spinoff of General Electric, backed away from its plan to build the turbines needed for the projects. State officials say the 3 projects, Attentive Energy, Community Offshore Wind, and Excelsior Wind, would have delivered 4 gigawatts of offshore wind to the state, amounting to almost half of New York's ambitions to install 9 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2035. Industry analysts say the failed projects are a big blow to the administration's plans to see enough offshore wind built to supply 10 million homes by 2030, as well as to New York Governor Kathy Hochul, who has touted offshore wind's ability to create a wave of jobs and a surge in clean power. Now, as far as the next steps, New York State Energy Research and Development Authority said it will now look to open another competitive bidding round to fill the hole created by the latest cancellation. Scientists are testing a controversial idea in the Bay Area for cooling our warming planet. The University of Washington's Marine Cloud Brightening Project is using the first technology in the country to test ways to brighten clouds. The plan is to inject sea salt aerosols into clouds, which scientists hope will reflect sunlight back into space to help cool the Earth. Brightening clouds is one of several ideas to push solar energy back into space. Others include solar radiation modification, solar geoengineering, or climate intervention. Marine cloud brightening would be localized and uses relatively benign sea salt aerosols as opposed to other chemicals. However, there are concerns over this method as the consequences could be hard to predict or even measure. Cloud brightening could also alter precipitation patterns, including decreasing rainfall in one place while increasing it elsewhere. We will certainly keep our eyes on this story. An invasive species is being put to good use in Hawaii. A new surfboard company called Bezia Surf and Coffee Bar is making eco-friendly surfboards out of the wood from the albizia tree, an invasive tree that's common in the Aloha State. One of the business owners says the highly invasive wood is very problematic in the state, so any opportunity to make something with it is a win. Adding, the shop gets the unwanted albizia wood from removal projects and then partners with other organizations to restore native ecosystems. Turning to international news, Scotland says it will ditch an ambitious climate pledge. Government officials recently announced it's abandoning plans to reduce carbon emissions by 75% over the next 6 years. Scotland's decision to walk back their commitment for 2030 comes after the UK Climate Change Committee sharply criticized Scotland for repeatedly failing to achieve its climate targets, saying in part, quote, "The Scottish government delayed its draft climate change plans last year despite the 2030 target being only 6 years away. This has left a significant period without sufficient actions or policies to reach the target. The required acceleration in emissions reduction in Scotland is now beyond what is credible." The statement added the government missed its annual climate target 8 times in the past 12 years. Despite the news, which outraged many environmentalists, former First Minister Humza Yousaf vowed Scotland would still meet its target of reaching net zero by 2045. And now we're tracking the movement of the world's biggest iceberg. The colossal ice mass, also called A23A, has begun to refloat after being lodged in the mud at the edge of Antarctica's Weddell Sea for over 30 years. Scientists say the berg is now drifting close to the South Orkney Islands, about 430 miles northeast of the tip of the Antarctic Peninsula. Researchers say the iceberg is on a course referred to as Iceberg Alley along the easternmost point in Canada, which exports a lot of Antarctica's floating ice. Glaciologists say that means the iceberg could fragment and melt into nothing. The giant ice sheet, which is more than twice the size of Greater London, originally broke away from the Antarctic coastline nearly 40 years ago, but it did not start moving again until 2020 due to gradual melting. Scientists say once it started traveling again, ocean currents and wind swept it north towards warmer air and waters. If you're headed to Europe, prepare for it to be hot, as some new data suggests Europe is the world's fastest warming continent, according to a joint report from 2 of the United Nations International Climate Monitoring Organizations. 2023 was one of Europe's hottest. Researchers said parts of the continent experienced temperatures up to 2.6 degrees Celsius or 4.68 degrees Fahrenheit above pre-industrial levels, while the Alps saw temperatures at 2.3 degrees Celsius or 4.14 degrees Fahrenheit above average. Scientists also warned extreme heat stress was present for a record number of days last year, meaning the feels-like temperature was higher than 115 degrees Fahrenheit, according to the research. The report comes just after the UN climate agency Copernicus said March marked the globe's 10th month in a row that set its warmest respective month on record. A group of Swiss women win a major climate case in Europe's top human rights court. Sarah Williamson has more.
I think today's ruling is a huge boost to the climate litigation movement that's happening in Europe and around the world.
A win for the environment. All thanks to more than 2,000 Swiss women taking human rights into their own hands. Europe's top human rights court ruling in their favour, concluding that the Swiss government did violate the human rights of its citizens by failing to do enough to combat climate change.
The court holds that the respondent state exceeded its margin of appreciation and failed to comply with its positive obligations under Article 8 of the Convention.
The court's ruling in the Swiss case is of huge significance because it affirms that the European Convention on Human Rights applies to the climate crisis, that governments have legal duties to act, and they've upheld the right of people to go to court and challenge their government's weak climate action.
It's a ruling that will resonate across Europe and beyond. The group of Swiss women, all aged over 64, argue that their age and gender makes them particularly vulnerable to climate impacts. The Swiss Federal Office of Justice, which represented the government, took note of the ruling, releasing a statement saying, quote, "Together with the authorities concerned, we will now analyse the extensive judgment and review what measures Switzerland will take in the future."
This is just one step in the direction towards climate justice. We have a very long way to go. We must make sure that first that this is being upheld, and then that we actually achieve climate justice, that the emissions reduce, and that we have a fair transition.
The verdict, which cannot be appealed, will have a direct effect internationally by establishing a binding legal precedent for all 46 countries that are signatories to the European Convention of Human Rights. For EarthX, I'm Sarah Williamson.
Sarah, thank you. Coming up, scientists are exploring ways to increase the capacity of the U.S. power grid. Stay tuned. We'll have more on the idea that researchers are entertaining when EarthX News continues. A rarely used technique to upgrade old power lines could play a major role in expanding the U.S. power grid. The method is called advanced reconductoring, and a couple of recent reports suggest the concept could roughly double the capacity of the electric grid in many parts of the country. Joining us now to discuss is one of the lead researchers who compiled the data showcasing the benefits of using this technology, Umed Paliwal, senior scientist at the University of California, Berkeley. Can you tell me more about advanced reconductoring and what your research has been telling you?
Yeah, thank you for having me here. So essentially, reconductoring is essentially replacing the wires of an existing power line with newer wires that are made up of advanced materials. Now these newer wires are able to carry double the amount of electricity as compared to the conventional wires. And the reason this is so important today, because the US is seeing an unprecedented growth in the electricity demand. We are getting new manufacturing facilities set up in the US, a lot of data centers are coming in the US, and more consumers are buying electric vehicles. All these users need a reliable supply of electricity. So the solution that we are coming up is that of reconductoring, that we can just replace the wires of the existing transmission line. And the interesting thing about this is that this could be done in 1 to 2 years as compared to building new transmission lines, which takes 10 plus years. So that way, the electricity demand that is coming up today, in 1 to 2 years, we could supply that electricity reliably through just changing the wires of existing transmission lines.
What exactly is the difference between the current power lines that we're using versus if we were to put these advanced reconductoring wires in?
So in these newer wires, what we do is we replace the steel with a material that is made up of carbon fiber. And carbon fiber is 10 times as stronger as steel, and it doesn't sag when it's heated. The conventional wires that are used today, they are made up of aluminum and steel. It's a century-old technology that has not been updated so far. And what happens is, as you send more and more electricity through these wires, they heat up. And as we have studied in our physics classes, if something heats up, they expand. And as these conventional wires, they heat up, they expand and they sag. And what happens then, if they sag, they can come in contact with vegetation, and that could be a safety hazard. So if we send more and more electricity through these advanced wires, they don't sag, and that's why we can send more electricity through these wires as compared to the conventional wires.
So how big of an increase in capacity does advanced reconductoring provide? I know you mentioned 2 times, but is that the peak? We could get up to 2 times, but it might be less?
Yeah, so what we found in our study is that by 2035, if we adopt reconductoring, we can add 4 times as much new transmission capacity as otherwise if you would have just relied on the conventional wires. So the electricity is the foundation of our modern economy, and like it supply of cheap and reliable electricity like builds the industrial base. And if we have to compete globally, like that is a requirement. If we want the AI revolution to happen in the US as compared to somewhere else, we need to build this infrastructure.
Are there any environmental concerns tied to building these advanced wires?
Yeah, so there are, so these wires, the raw material that is used to build these wires is a byproduct of the oil refining process. So there are some carbon emissions that are associated with it. But what is again interesting is these advanced wires, they have half the as much as electrical losses as compared to conventional wires. Just give you a perspective, last year we lost about 5% of the electricity, and that is equivalent to the total amount of electricity that was generated in the state of California.
But what about the everyday American? Will it save them on their utility bill?
Yeah, so what we found is that by 2050, the electricity cost to the consumers were reduced by 3 to 4% because of these advanced wires. And by 2035, we estimate that the consumers would save $85 billion, and by 2050, the consumers would save $180 billion, like if we adopt reconductoring.
Where do you see this going in the future?
Yeah, so the utilities, they are a conservative industry. They tend to do what was done last year and so on last year. So slowly, a lot of utilities are waking up to this opportunity. I mean, it is kind of like important for them to adopt this technology because it takes 10 to 15 years to build these new transmission line. And this solution is much faster and costs half as much as building new lines.
Well, Umid Paliwal, senior scientist at the University of California, Berkeley, thank you so much for coming on and telling us about this incredible venture that you are a part of.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Coming up, global leaders are teaming up in an effort to combat plastic pollution. Stay tuned. That story is just ahead on EarthX News. Thousands of international delegates recently gathered in Canada to negotiate the world's first treaty to address plastic pollution. Caleb Park has more.
That's right. Representatives from countries around the world meeting in Ottawa, Canada for the International Plastics Negotiations known as INC4, hoping to help the rapidly escalating problem of plastic pollution as part of a United Nations environment program. Of grave concern, more people are breathing, eating, and drinking particles of plastic as the equivalent of 2,000 garbage trucks full of plastics are dumped into the world's oceans, rivers, and lakes every day. They say it's about the future of humanity.
We are facing a triple planetary crisis. It's climate, it's biodiversity loss, and pollution. And the negotiations for a plastic treaty is embedded in this triple planetary crisis and should, by its outcome, also contribute to fight this triple planetary crisis.
The delegates aim to create a treaty to stop the production of plastics with sharp disagreements from countries and companies that produce oil and gas. Industry analysts say Kenya has struggled with plastic waste for a long time. Kenya is one of East Africa's first countries to limit single-use plastics, where officials are concerned about negotiations in Ottawa. More than 2,500 delegates representing 170 members came together to negotiate the revised draft text of an international legally binding agreement. Their next meeting will be held in Busan, South Korea in November. For EarthX, I'm Caleb Park.
Caleb Park, thank you. Wild horses at a national park in North Dakota are staying put. U.S. Senator John Hoeven has announced the National Park Service will abandon plans that could have removed roughly 200 horses from the Theodore Roosevelt National Park and will only be reducing their numbers instead. The about-face comes after park officials started crafting a livestock plan about 2 years ago that included proposals to get rid of the horses. But that idea did not sit well with the public, who pushed back against the idea during a public review of the policy. Conservationists, along with the senator, praised the park's decision to keep the wild horses in the park. In a statement, Senator Hoeven said in part, quote, "The move will allow for a healthy herd of wild horses to be maintained at the park, managed in a way to support genetic diversity among the herd and preserve the park's natural resources." An 18-foot python gets a health check in Australia. Several staffers at the Perth Zoo in Western Australia worked together to hold the big snake in place during her recent annual physical. Zoo officials said the Burmese python, named Samorn, weighs 106 pounds and is nearly 5.5 meters long. The veterinarian team also said they examined her body condition, mobility, took x-rays from head to tail, and concluded she was in spectacular health. And before we leave you, an adorable moment at England's largest zoo. A baby white rhino was recently spotted running and jumping around the 21-acre conservation area at the wildlife facility just outside of London. Officials say the little one, named Benja, also started venturing outside his den in recent days with his mom. The zoo is part of a global conservation charity which works to protect endangered species and their habitats. That's it for this edition of EarthX News. Please join us again next week. I'm Christina Thompson.